but pretty explicitly by Lindsey Graham, who has apologized and explained him throughout this campaign and throughout the last couple of years, saying it's time for him to stop putting conspiracy theorists on his airplane and get to the issues. McKay Coppins, separately, as we talk about conspiracy theories and stoking divisions, J.D. Vance on Monday was asked about January 6th on a podcast called All In, which is not related to MSNBC's program with Chris Hayes by the same name, by the way. And here's what Vance had to say.
Pence was not asked to overturn the election. He couldn't have. But two, the reason...
He was asked to not certify it.
Sure.
So would you have certified? I'll ask you for the third.
Again, I would have asked the states to submit alternative slates of electors and let the country have the debate. It doesn't necessarily mean the results would have been any different, but we at least would have had the debate in Pennsylvania and Georgia.
I don't know where to start. The Supreme Court made decisions in there were 63 separate judges, and several of those cases went all the way to the Supreme Court, that there were not fraud that would have changed the election outcomes, and that the electors should, on schedule, on January 6th, all be certified. And the fact that Pence wasn't asked, I mean, there's endless testimony about that, including from him.
Yeah, there's literally no substance to back up what J.D. Vance just said. But I do think it's important to talk about what J.D. Vance is doing here, because this is why he was added to the ticket, right? He made a Faustian bargain a few years ago when he decided to transition his career from best-selling author and thought leader to MAGA political candidate, that he was going to do what it needed to be done to get on Trump's good side. And he has spent the last several years basically auditioning for the role of Donald Trump's VP. And when you're auditioning for that role, you have to say a lot of things that you know are not true. You have to do a lot of unseemly things. J.D. Vance, according to people who know him, knows better. But he has decided that this is the career he wants, that this is the job he wants. He's trying to get elected to vice president. It's been pretty successful. You know, he's wound up, you know, not that far away from potentially the vice presidency. But I do think it's worth asking what he's given up to get here. And when I talk to some of his former Senate colleagues, for example, Mitt Romney, they just say that there are few examples of somebody who has kind of sold his soul in pursuit of power more vivid than J.D. Vance. And I think that's what you're seeing going on there with that answer that he just gave.
And Garrett, you've been covering this campaign and doing it so brilliantly. I mean, this is not a typical campaign. When someone like Laura Loomer is put on a plane, not only heading to the debate, but heading to the 9/11 commemorations after being a 9/11 denier, with a nominee for the presidency of the United States, we have to call that out. So this is not on the one hand and on the other hand. You know, you can't find anything comparable on the Democratic side.
No, there really is no meaningful comparison here, Andrea. And, you know, look, I'm not somebody who's particularly usually interested in what I would call like a staff story, but here I think it tells you something really important about the candidate, who he is choosing to associate with. It's a version of the conversation we had when he accepted the endorsement from RFK Jr. and essentially having to ally himself with all the controversial things that he had said as we're looking at someone who might be the next president of the United States, the kind of person who they take advice from on very important days, the kind of person who they travel around the country with, is instructive of the kind of way they would lead the country and the kind of people that they might put in a cabinet or a judgeship or any other job of substance within the federal government. And so I think it's a very much a valid thing to look at the kind of people and the kind of information that's going into Donald Trump's ears, even if he is, as Michael suggests correctly, ultimately the person who's responsible for what ends up coming out of his mouth.
Garrett Haake, of course, will be watching your reporting. Michael Steele will be watching you on the weekend, and McKay Coppins reading all of your great reporting as well. Thank you all so much. And in 90 seconds, the battleground blitz continues for Vice President Harris today in Pennsylvania. And a new exclusive, Hillary Clinton